So after the Civil War ended, the United States had to reintegrate both a formerly slave population and a formerly rebellious population back into the country, which is a challenge that we might have met, except Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and we were left with Andrew "I am the third worst president ever" Johnson. I'm sorry, Abe, but you don't get to be in the show anymore. So Lincoln's whole post-war idea was to facilitate reunion and reconciliation, and Andrew Johnson's guiding Reconstruction principle was that the South never had a right to secede in the first place. Also, because he was himself a Southerner, he resented all the elites in the South who had snubbed him, and he was also a racist who didn't think that blacks should have any role in Reconstruction. Trifecta! So between 1865 and 1867, the so-called period of presidential Reconstruction, Johnson appointed provisional governors and ordered them to call state conventions to establish new, all-white governments. And in their 100% whiteness and oppression of former slaves, those new governments looked suspiciously like the old Confederate governments they had replaced. And what was changing for the former slaves? Well, in some ways, a lot. Like Fisk and Howard universities were established, as well as many primary and secondary schools, thanks in part to the Freedmen's Bureau, which only lasted until 1870, but had the power to divide up confiscated and abandoned Confederate land for former slaves. And this was very important because to most slaves, land ownership was the key to freedom, and many felt like they'd been promised land by the Union Army, like General Sherman's Field Order 15 promised to distribute land in 40-acre plots to former slaves. But that didn't happen, either through the Freedmen's Bureau or anywhere else. Instead, President Johnson ordered all land returned to its former owners, so the South remained largely agricultural, with the same people owning the same land, and in the end, we ended up with sharecropping. Let's go to the thought bubble. So the Republicans in Congress weren't happy that this reconstructed South looked so much like the pre-Civil War South, so they took the lead in Reconstruction after 1867. Radical Republicans felt the war had been fought for equal rights and wanted to see the powers of the national government expanded. Few were as radical as Thaddeus Tommy Lee Jones Stevens, who wanted to take away land from the Southern planters and give it to the former slaves, but rank-and-file Republicans were radical enough to pass the Civil Rights Bill, which defined persons born in the United States as citizens and established nationwide equality before the law regardless of race. Andrew Johnson immediately vetoed the law, claiming that trying to protect the rights of African Americans amounted to discrimination against white people, which so infuriated Republicans that Congress did something it had never done before in all of American history. They overrode the presidential veto with a 2/3 majority, and the Civil Rights Act became law. So then Congress really had its dander up and decided to amend the Constitution with the 14th Amendment, which defines citizenship, guarantees equal protection, and extends the rights in the Bill of Rights to all the states, sort of. The amendment had almost no Democratic support, but it also didn't need any, because there were almost no Democrats in Congress on account of how Congress had refused to seat the representatives from the new all-white governments that Johnson supported. And that's how we got the 14th Amendment, arguably the most important in the whole Constitution. So okay, in 1867, again over Johnson's veto, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, which divided the South into 5 military districts and required each state to create a new government, one that included participation of black men. Those new governments had to ratify the 14th Amendment if they wanted to get back into the Union. Radical Reconstruction had begun. So in 1868, Andrew Johnson was about as electable in the U.S. as Jefferson Davis, and sure enough, he didn't win. Instead, the 1868 election was won by Republican and former Union General Ulysses S. Grant. But Grant's margin of victory was small enough that Republicans were like, man, we would sure win more elections if black people could vote, which is something you hear Republicans say all the time these days. So congressional Republicans pushed through the 15th Amendment, which prohibited states from denying men the right to vote based on race, but not based on gender or literacy or whether your grandfather could vote. So states ended up with a lot of leeway when it came to denying the franchise to African Americans, which of course they did. Having African American office holders was a huge step forward in terms of ensuring the rights of African Americans, because it meant that there would be black juries and less discrimination in state and local governments when it came to providing basic services. But in the end, Republican governments failed in the South. There were important achievements, especially a school system that, while segregated, did attempt to educate both black and white children. And even more importantly, they created a functioning government where both white and African American citizens could participate. And that's not why Reconstruction really ended. It ended because, one, things like schools and road repair cost money, which meant taxes, which made Republican governments very unpopular because Americans hate taxes. And two, white Southerners could not accept African Americans exercising basic civil rights, holding office, or voting. And for many, the best way to return things to the way they were before Reconstruction Reconstruction was through violence. Especially after 1867, much of the violence directed toward African Americans in the South was politically motivated. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1866, and it quickly became a terrorist organization targeting Republicans, both black and white, beating and murdering men and women in order to intimidate them and keep them from voting. These white Southern politicians called themselves redeemers because they claimed to have redeemed the South from Northern Republican corruption and black rule. And this set up one of the most contentious elections in American history. The Democrats nominated New York Governor and NYU Law School graduate Samuel Tilden. The Republicans chose Ohio Governor and Kenyon College alumnus Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, you might remember that in these situations, there is a constitutional provision that says Congress should decide the winner, but Congress, shockingly, proved unable to accomplish something. So they appointed a 15-man electoral commission, a super committee, if you will, and there were 8 Republicans on that committee and 7 Democrats, so you will never guess who won. Kenyon College's own Rutherford B. Hayes. Go, lords and ladies! And yes, that is our mascot. Shut up. Anyway, in order to get the presidency and win the support of the super committee, Hayes's people agreed to cede control of the South to the Democrats and to stop meddling in Southern affairs, and also to build a transcontinental railroad through Texas. This is called the Bargain of 1877 because historians are so good at naming things, and it basically killed Reconstruction.